Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.
Hey everybody, I'm back home after 5 pretty harrowing days spent locked up in a halfway house in the Bronx. The windows were nailed shut, there was very little ventilation, and they wouldn't let me out, unlike every other person in the halfway house. I literally just got fresh air for the first time today after 5 days. You know, last Wednesday I got this bizarre call in the morning. My son had just gone to school, he's in 10th grade, and it said, come in, bring clothes. And they wouldn't tell me why. I got there, they still wouldn't tell me why. 36 hours passed and I was just sitting there, had to stay there overnight. My son came home from school that day and his dad was gone and we had no explanation as to when I might be back. I was really worried they were going to try to put me in prison. They finally told me what the problem was, which is that they violated me because I had been in my building, in my apartment building, but not in my apartment for a couple of hours for a meeting. Frankly, this is nonsense. And while I respect the procedures and the conditions of my very unjust and I would say illegal confinement, this was highly unusual, and I strongly suspect Chevron and its lawyers are behind it. In any event, thanks to Amnesty International, Representative McGovern, my lawyers, Ron Kuby, and thousands of people around the world who stood by me and demanded I be returned home, which finally happened today. This is an example of how Chevron still wants to disrupt my human rights work and to attack me as a way to avoid paying the judgment to the indigenous peoples in Ecuador, who the company poisoned by deliberately dumping 16 billion gallons of toxic waste in the Amazon. We need to protect me. We need to force this company to pay what it owes to the people of Ecuador. If you can help us, again, I urge you, please go to our website, freedonziger.com. One word, Free Donziger, D-O-N-Z-I-G-E-R. We need resources to deal with this monster polluter called Chevron and its attacks on me and other advocates who are working to enforce this judgment to help the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. Again, it's freedonziger.com. I'll give more details later. I'm so happy to be home. And I thank everyone who helped and stood by me. I felt the solidarity. Lots of love. I'll be reporting back soon.
Hello and welcome to a special segment on the Nomiki Show. We are really grateful to have Steven Donziger with us today. Steven Donziger is, of course, the famous lawyer who won that historic judgment against Chevron. It was a $9.5 billion judgment, and they did not take that lightly. We've, of course, covered his case extensively on the show, but you've just seen that video and got a little brief overview of what happened. But Steven, thanks for joining us. And I know you're very, very busy. There's a lot happening, but we wanted to initially we were going to have one of your attorneys on, but you actually were released from the halfway house a couple of days ago. And first off, how are you feeling?
Well, it's great to be with you again, Nomiki. I love your show, love what you do, and I have a lot of support for your independent journalism. I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, it was a harrowing experience to be just taken for no reason out of your home in front of your kid. It was tough, but I'm strong and I'm back. Once again, I actually believe that with the help of so many supporters around the world, including Amnesty International and independent journalists and Amazon Watch and so many people, Representative Jim McGovern from Massachusetts was very helpful. That's why I'm home. I never really understood why I was taken. I don't completely understand why I was then released. It all seems very opaque and arbitrary, but I am home and still not free. I still have another 70 or so days until the end of my sentence. They put the ankle bracelet back on, which I wear 24/7. So I still live in confinement, and the conditions are pretty oppressive, but they're much better than prisoner of the halfway house. I will say this, to kind of give people a sense of what I'm dealing with. Last night or overnight, literally at 4:15 this morning, my phone rang. And we have a landline here because as part of my conditions of home confinement, the Bureau of Prisons requires you to put in a land phone. We hadn't had one before. And I got a call on that phone. So whenever anyone calls me on that phone, because I don't give the number to anybody, I know it's the halfway house or the prison. So whenever it rings, it's scary because I don't know if they're going to say, come in, or we're going to pick you up. In any event, it rang at 4:15, woke us up. I had to then take a selfie and send it in to prove I was in my home, even though I have an ankle bracelet home, and I just answered a home phone. I mean, it's just insane.
Wait, so they just wanted to check in on you at 4:15 and have you send a selfie?
Yeah.
That was it?
Yeah, they in other words, the suspicion is like I'm not there. They want me to prove I'm in my own home at 4:15 in the morning, which is just preposterous. I mean, they can make that call at 11 p.m. and then at 7 a.m. I mean, why 4:15?
Yeah.
And also remember, I have an ankle bracelet on, so they know where I am anyway. So.
I have a few questions because you were released from the Danbury prison early, which is wonderful, due to a lot of support from externally, and at the time when we interviewed you, I don't know if you've learned more about what led to that release, but also I in conjunction with that, I'm curious who oversees the halfway house. Is it the same people? Is it this? Where does the buck stop? I just don't understand. Where's the chain of command?
That's a key question that it's almost impossible to answer. Okay, this is what we know. And, first of all, respect to the Bureau of Prisons. I mean, they have a big job. They run a prison system with 150,000 bodies in over 100 facilities around the country. And that's a tough job. It's a multi-billion-dollar agency. I'm just a little tiny piece of that, right? But the way it works is when you get out of prison, most people don't go directly home. They go to a halfway house to transition you back into the community. And the halfway house has fewer restrictions than prison, but many, many more restrictions than you would have if you were just free on the outside. So the halfway house that I'm being overseen by now, even though I'm not physically there, they're the entity responsible for making sure I'm at home of confinement. They're part of a private company that is really, it's the former Wackenhut company which Wackenhut is a private security company that used to run a bunch of private prisons. And they have a contract with the Federal Bureau of Prisons to put people in halfway houses and monitor them until they can be released, or in the event they're on home confinement, like me, monitor them on home confinement. So the people in charge run the halfway house. They're decent people, nice people, but they are carrying out a mandate that, is really designed to constantly remind everyone within it that, you don't have control over your life and they have control. And, the example of them calling me on my landline and just saying, hey, get some clothes together, you're coming in. So I'm essentially taken from my home by force, one without knowing when I might come back. It's scary, and look, it happens to a lot of people. I mean, this is all new to me, so I'm like shocked by this. I mean, this is sort of how they just do things. And again, I think it's, I don't know what I can say about it, except that even though I'm home, I feel like there's a great deal of control over my life, and I really am not free.
You're home, and you're going to be monitored for a bit more time. How many more days?
Until April 25th. That's when
Okay,
my sentence ends. So it's about, a little over 2 months.
And then after a sentence, so if it was a traditional sentence, you would go to a halfway house. Are they going to make you go to a halfway house after your home sentence?
No.
Okay.
No. Okay. Basically, when you have a sentence of 6 months or less, which I do, you don't go to a halfway house.
Interesting. Okay.
You just serve your sentence. But I got released under a particular legal provision passed by Congress based on COVID. It's called the First Step Act. And it allows people 60 years of age or older who, are at risk for COVID. I'm 60, by the way. I just turned 60. To leave and serve out the rest of their sentences at home. So I got released under kind of a different legal provision. But normally people who serve long sentences end up at halfway houses before they go back to the community. And if you can't function well in a halfway house with all of those restrictions, sometimes they put you back in prison. In my particular case, in the halfway house, I was locked up there for 5 days because of this issue, this bizarre issue I had last week. I pretty much kept to myself. They wouldn't let me out. The windows were nailed shut. Couldn't get fresh air. Made no sense to me. But in any event, I met people in the halfway house who had literally been in prison. One man had been in prison 31 years.
Oh my
and he had just arrived at the halfway house 2 days before. He talked to me. And he asked me to help him set up his cell phone. He had never had a cell phone before. So there were people coming out of prison with really long sentences. By the way, that man I just talked about had a drug offense. I mean, he was distributing drugs, cocaine, crack, and the like at the height of the drug war in the 90s. And he just got completely slammed. So he had just spent from age 29 to 50, from 28 to 59, locked up in penitentiaries. And he literally had just shown up at the halfway house 2 days before, and he was the nicest man, and I I gave him a hug. And it breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart to see this.
So, our criminal justice system is clearly broken. After April 25th, what do you expect? Are they going to be done with you? Like, are you able to be a free man, or is there anything else that is still legally pending?
Well, I expect this nightmarish ordeal to be over at that point. And now Chevron, which is behind all of this, still has a civil case that they're pursuing against me.
Okay.
And who knows what might come of that. I have lawyers, and hopefully this will end April 25th, or there'll be some additional things that need to be dealt with, but nothing of this sort. I mean, it's a civil case.
Yeah.
And this criminal contempt charge was just unprecedented. And, I hope it never happens again to me or anybody else. I will say that my conviction, I call my so-called conviction because I never had a jury, is under appeal.
It is. Okay.
It is under appeal. It's not final. And I hope to win my appeal.
And who, where does it go? Do you face different judges? Is it different?
Yeah, it goes to the federal appellate court that oversees the New York federal trial court, which is called the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And it's already been argued before a 3-judge panel. My lawyer, Steven Donziger, who argued it, fabulous guy. He is a professor of law at the University of Texas at Austin Law School. He's an intellectual, a scholar, and a really good lawyer and a good moral advocate. So he argued for me. The issue fundamentally is the private prosecution, that I was prosecuted by a private law firm that had Chevron as a client, which is a flagrant conflict of interest. And my private prosecutor who worked for the Chevron law firm, Rita Glavin, was totally unsupervised by the Department of Justice. And those issues are extremely problematic and unprecedented. And we believe it, make my whole case unconstitutional and illegal. And, we're hoping they'll throw it out. But what's interesting about that, even if I win my appeal, think about all the pain and suffering I've had to endure in a case that I won.
Right.
Almost 3 years in detention, either in prison or at home with an ankle bracelet. So, the judges who want to abuse their power are able to inflict a whole lot of punishment without a conviction. Again, I was 2 years, 2 months in home detention before I even had a trial. So even if it ultimately gets corrected in the eyes of the law, as I hope this does, the punishment still happened. And, a lot of the judges who really, I think the 2 judges I've had to deal with who I don't think, take their ethical duties with enough seriousness, they, I believe, abused their power to impose punishments on me before I could even get a trial. And then the trial I had no jury, and it was not a fair trial, as has been determined by 9 international legal scholars, including the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention from the United Nations, which, by the way, has ruled my detention as arbitrary and violates multiple provisions of international law. So, Nomiki, we're calling on the Department of Justice of the United States, Attorney General Garland, to take back this case from the Chevron law firm. Just take it back, take control of it, and dismiss the charges. I mean, everybody knows that, what I did, which was really to appeal a civil discovery order, is not a criminal act of contempt. Never has been charged that way in American history against any lawyer. They need to take the case back, dismiss the charges, and get this case in our country back in conformity with international law. You should not have human rights lawyers in America detained for even a day, much less 3 years. That's you sometimes hear about that in other places, Russia.
Of course, yeah.
Russia. I mean, look at the Khashoggi case in Saudi Arabia. I mean, you see these brutalization of human rights lawyers and advocates in many countries. I'm calling on President Biden and Attorney General Garland to be sure that does not happen in this country. It is happening, though, to me. Please correct it, please.
And this is in light of a Supreme Court justice conversation in which in many cases, across the country, the judges that have been appointed by Biden have been more progressive than I think many would have expected at the lower courts. But, the conversation about Michelle Fields is that she is her experience is protecting corporations. She was an employment attorney, but on the employer side, union busting and discrimination cases, the majority of her work when she was a partner at her law firm was doing that work. So if there's ever a moment to have a deep conversation about the impact of major corporations over our judicial system, I think this is the time. And if President Biden wants to show that he really is not on the sides of these monopolies, then this would be a very easy thing for him to step in and act on in Merrick Garland. What's happening with the judgment?
So just so people understand, the people of Ecuador, the indigenous peoples and farmer communities, are owners of a $9.5 billion pollution judgment that Chevron is refusing to pay, even though it's been affirmed by multiple appellate courts around the world, including the entire Supreme Courts of Ecuador and Canada, affirmed for enforcement purposes. Chevron is, I believe, attacking me to try to disable my advocacy to lessen the risk of those judgments being enforced. But there are other lawyers working on them. And the plan of the communities is to enforce those judgments against Chevron's assets in other countries outside the United States, including Canada and other places, to ensure Chevron complies with the rule of law and addresses the poison it literally dumped deliberately onto ancestral lands down in the Amazon. So the case is very much alive. Look, I don't think Chevron will be paying 60 law firms and using 2,000 lawyers to do what they're trying to do to me if they didn't feel tremendous risk from this judgment. This case is alive, and the community's plan to make sure it gets enforced against Chevron.
Is there a fear that this is going to open up other cases, other lawsuits in different parts of the world where similar, negligent acts have taken place with Chevron and other oil companies?
You mean fear in Chevron?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, look, Chevron knows better than anybody that it has, 100 billion plus liability around the world because of all its acts of pollution in dozens of countries, which, by the way, have been documented in a fabulous report by Dr. Nan Greer recently. But, I think Chevron probably feels like if the indigenous peoples of Ecuador recover the money in this case, even though they've been out there for 50 years, drinking poison water, they fear that it'll inspire other vulnerable communities in other countries to do the same thing. So, I think they're spending massive sums of money to prevent the Ecuadorians from enforcing their judgment. Part of that is to spend money to, hurt me and disable my advocacy. Even though I'm locked up, by the way, I'm still here, and I don't think they have succeeded. Because there's lawyers literally flooding into the case, seeing what's happening to me. I mean, people don't like it, and they particularly don't like it when you're attacking a lawyer I've spent 28 years. I've been to Ecuador 250 times from my home in New York, trying to work with the indigenous peoples in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon region to really make sure they get a remedy for this awful pollution problem, which is called the Amazon Chernobyl. It's probably the world's worst oil-related disaster. And I say disaster advisedly in the sense that, it didn't just happen because of an accident like, say, the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico. This was part of a deliberate design by Texaco, now owned by Chevron, to externalize the cost of production onto some of the most vulnerable communities on the planet. And, over time, they were down there 25 years doing this from the, 70s, the 80s into the early 90s. And at the height of the operation, they were literally discharging 4 million gallons per day of scalding hot water of formation that contained cancer-causing benzene and other harmful toxins. And this stuff was just being dumped into rivers and streams that Chevron knew local inhabitants, local residents were drinking out of. Because people who grow up in the forest, they're rich. They get fresh water naturally. They don't have to go to the faucet like we do or buy a bottle of water out of the store like we do in New York or other parts of the United States. They had their water. And it was all poison, but it was poison in the worst way possible by a company that never told people of the health impacts of what it was doing. So people kept drinking it. And I can't tell how many people have passed away because of exposures to toxins in that water and in the food and in the air. Yeah. We don't know the precise number, but I would personally estimate thousands of people have died of cancer because of what Chevron did and its failure to clean up.
You mentioned that lawyers are flooding your case, and that's really wonderful. I imagine that the legal community, at least individuals, have probably come to you, and lawyers are concerned that, if these kinds of actions can be taken against you, where does it stop? Conflicts of interest just seem to me, like glaring conflicts of interest seem to, I wouldn't even know as a lawyer. I wouldn't feel safe. Who you can represent anymore, what you can try if you realize that they might go after you as an attorney.
Well, I think it's important that all attorneys stick together. No matter what your politics, whether you represent corporations or, victims of police abuse or human rights, victims of human rights abuses, like we have to stick together to protect the profession. I mean, it's totally unacceptable that a lawyer gets sued for doing his job, doing his or her job successfully. I mean, that's just crazy. And you don't see that anywhere but the United States. I mean, I've done work in Canada with lawyers. They're like, that would never happen in this country. I mean, judges wouldn't allow it.
Right.
So, you know, I don't think that should be legal. It happened to me. It's happened to other lawyers. And, you know, we need to become aware of it. And, you know, frankly, I could have gotten a whole lot more support from the legal profession in New York City. Not one of the bar associations has said a word about the attacks on me. Although I've gotten massive support from lawyers around the world, none from the place it's happening, because lawyers I think they're intimidated.
They're probably afraid too, because they're going to face that judge.
Yeah,
potentially.
that's exactly right. You know, but still, I mean, speak.
Of course.
Come on. I mean, stand up for the fundamental principle that a lawyer should be allowed to do his or her job and litigate cases on the merits without being sued personally and then made like, you know, this sort of weapon of mass distraction from what is a meritorious case, which is what Chevron has tried to do by suing me and putting me in this position. You know, they would rather this be about me than about what they did to poison the Amazon and harm people down in Ecuador. And, you know, we have to be cognizant of that. When I appear on these shows, you know, I want to remind people, and again, I probably don't do it enough. This is fundamentally about the fact that indigenous peoples in Ecuador, in the Amazon, and farmer communities won a significant pollution judgment against Chevron, and the company is looking for ways not to pay it. So they're attacking me and trying to make me the issue. But I'm not the issue. The issue is Chevron's poisoning of indigenous peoples in Ecuador. Chevron lost the legal case. It's been affirmed by multiple appellate courts, 28 appellate judges in total. And the company still refuses to pay the judgment while people suffer and die as a result. That's the issue, not me.
That's right.
You know, I'm just trying to put a voice to the issue and a voice on the people I've had the privilege of getting to know for 28 years as I've worked on this case, people down in the Amazon, you know, who don't have access to these shows and don't have access to platforms like I do. So let's just be careful here to not get too caught up in the saga of Steven Donziger, although I will say I consider that important too, and I need protection and support. But also, let's not forget that, you know, that the real issue is not me. It is what Chevron did to the people of Ecuador and the company's obstinate, and I would say unethical and illegal, refusal to comply with the law and pay the judgment that it owes, and that has been affirmed by multiple appellate courts around the world.
Well, I will say, you know, your becoming part of the issue has definitely raised awareness of the actual issue, and it's, you know, it's that's what's so important when you come out and you speak. You know, you're telling the story of their tactics, which are, you know, horrifying and dangerous to democracy, but simultaneously through that, you're highlighting the absolutely egregious acts that they've taken and in killing people, poisoning people, indigenous people, and not paying for it. So
it's all connected. I don't mean to ignore me. And I'm happy to do what I do, and I'm totally happy to speak with you and others. But it needs to be put into context.
Yes,
you know, the attacks on me are happening because our team won the case.
Right.
You know, and they're trying to distract attention from the fact they owe, you know, $10 billion to the people of Ecuador. They don't want to pay it.
That's right. Steven, what happens, what are you planning on doing after April 25th?
Well, I don't know. You know, I have a lot of things I want to do. I very much look forward to the future. I mean, part of my work will continue in terms of supporting the people of Ecuador. I won't be out in front like I have been all these years. There will be other lawyers taking the lead. But I will be here, and I will stand by my clients and do, you know, within reason what I can to contribute to, you know, the enforcement of the judgment. And apart from that, I plan to pursue some other, you know, personal projects, including some writing and some journalism. And, you know, I'm just very much looking forward to being able to resume, you know, a relatively normal life where I can be with my friends and family and
you can go take a walk in the park again.
I haven't been on a vacation for 3 years.
Oh my goodness.
And just go out to dinner on occasion and
some fresh air.
get some fresh air. Although my windows are right here, they're open.
I saw a little breeze. I was like, uh-oh. They're going to feel it, the breeze on your
ankle.
ankle.
I spent a lot of time sitting on the ledge next to
I see on your social media, the wine glass and the books.
I live on the 7th floor of an apartment building in Manhattan. And, so we get a fair amount of light. And when the weather's nice, I open the windows, I sit and I'll take a book or the newspaper and I'll just stick my head out the window and I'll just read it, trying to get some sun. I mean, it's like little things like that keep me relatively sane.
I remember my personal story. My grandmother was a teacher, and she was a teacher in Buffalo, but she loved going on vacations. And when one day, she was on a trip with my mom, and they were in Arizona, and they were driving to the airport, and my grandmother had the window down and her head out like this. She's like, I'm getting the last bits of sunlight I can before I go back. So we all do it.
I can relate, believe me.
Steven, thank you for everything, for your time, for your advocacy, for your courage, for sharing your story, and really informing so many of us, teaching us about just the injustices that have happened in the Amazon against so many indigenous people, but also the corporate tactics that are, it's important for us to know.
Good. Well, thank you. And if I could just mention before we part ways here, if people want to learn more about the case in Ecuador, go to freedonziger.com. It's one word, Free Donziger, Donziger. We also have a legal defense fund. I'm always hesitant to ask people for help, but we need help.
Yes.
There's no way around it. You need resources to survive these kinds of attacks, and also to turn the tables and go after them so the people of Ecuador can finally get paid the judgment that they won. So you can donate also on the website. It's at freedonziger.com. By the way, if you can't donate, go anyway, sign up and look at the articles and learn more about it. We need people to help spread the word.
Absolutely. And we'll have that information up on screen as usual. Steven, thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you,
enjoy the fresh air. Hope it's sunnier today.
Take care.
The Nomiki Show. Clash momentarily for clash solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed. Everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show.